Welcome to Changemakers with me, Michael Hayman. Today I'm joined by the Chief Executive and founder of Bully Pulpit International, Andrew Bleeker. Now, I've been working with Andrew over the last year, and I've seen at first hand why he's a trusted counsellor to leaders at moments of change and transformation. His career bridges business and policy, notably as the lead digital marketing strategist on both of President Barack Obama's presidential campaigns. Today, he works around the world on campaigns that power change, using data, insights, and state-of-the-art comms techniques to help leaders navigate risk and corporations build resilience. This is the story of what it means to lead change and not be consumed by it.
Andrew, welcome to London. Welcome to Changemakers. Great to see you here off the plane at 1 o'clock, straight into the studio. That's hardcore.
Thanks for having me. Changemakers has been on my podcast list for a long time, so great to be in the studio.
Well, real pleasure. I mean, and when I say straight off the plane from DC, over from the States, tell us all about first chair advisors. I mean, that's the big pitch. Explain it to us.
Well, one or two things are going on in the States at the moment, but here too. Look, I think we find ourselves in this moment of change, right? We all talk about change, and this moment has a lot of different changes happening at the same time, and I think that's throwing everybody for a loop, particularly CEOs and leaders, be that in the private sector or the public sector, because at the same time we're having societal changes, geopolitical changes, cultural changes, and obviously huge changes in the way we communicate in technology. And if you think about how a normal organization is organized, right? If you think about the CEO, who's around that table?
Yeah,
there's a general counsel, there's a CFO, there's certain business leaders, but historically, yes, there's maybe been a chief marketing officer, but who really is on all these new issues that are coming at us? They're not single audience issues. They're not just investor issues. They're not just your talent issues with the CHRO. They're not just regulator issues. But of course, everyone's interested in the same topics today. And so the question is, who's in charge? Who do you turn to? And our view has always been, and we found that we're now 15 years into BPI, is that there's a real desire to have an advisor that could sit across the public and help you on the most important issues.
And is it the communicator? I mean, is that what sits in the first chair?
Well, I think what we're seeing is that there's a communicator plus,
right?
But it's communication skills are the basis of it. But you do have to understand how communications fits with the business. How does it fit with policy? How does it fit with the investment community? And who can help you navigate, like whether it was Russia invading Ukraine, whether it's COVID, whether it's what's going on with AI. Of course, all the people in the C-suite have a view on that, but someone's got to run.
But that's a total disruption to old models, right? A stretch on the capabilities of people that are going to sit in that chair.
Yeah, and really the reason I think it's evolved is that most of these issues have really flummoxed CEOs. Because I think what we found is that, black swan issue, a pandemic, okay, they happened occasionally. And those were sort of stop the presses issues, and the whole C-suite turned on to this. But now these are constant.
Yeah, no,
every week
they really are.
Is Trump tweeting at you? Or did all of a sudden your product have a tariff? Is there?
I think the speed of change is quite something for leaders. And I remember in Mission we interviewed an entrepreneur that talked about we're living in dog years, as in like every new one's worth 7 old ones. I actually think it needs another mammal. I mean, I don't know what. Maybe it's mouse years. Who knows? But I mean, it's an accelerated period of change.
Yeah, and we're not even 6 months into this administration.
Yeah,
right. And we got a long way to go.
Well, six months in the States, 12 months here. But I suppose
true
that is the backdrop, though, of a lot of change at policy level.
Well, a good example is in new administrations, we used to think in terms of the 100-day strategy.
Yeah.
Right. New prime minister, new president. But now we're talking 100 hours.
100 hours, yeah.
And that's really...
And that's are in the States.
But that's the expectations for companies too.
Yeah.
Is we've done a number of CEO announcements in the last couple weeks, and that's the expectation, that no one's giving them 3 months.
So velocity, speed, complexity. Great communicators usually bring simplicity, a sense of calm, a sense of navigation of these kind of like headwinds of change. What build on that for us in terms of what that first chair advisor really has in their arsenal?
So I think that was the first chair model 5 years ago, and all of those things are still fundamental. Of course, you need to have judgment, you need to be calm, you need to help get rid of all the lingo and the acronyms and help explain people why you matter.
Right.
But we're in a moment where, in addition to that, the media universe has changed too, right? And so one is fragmented. There's no general consensus on facts and information. We're not having one conversation. We're having many different conversations. Right. And the question is, how do we get to people where they are? Because we're living in a world now where people don't, particularly, we have some really interesting research on this, but people don't seek out news, particularly people under 50 and under 40. The majority of information that people get comes to them. They don't have a civic expectation. They weren't trained in school.
And it's curated.
It's curated based on algorithms and based on what else they've done, and it's not based on who you follow anymore, because we're in a video first social world that's based on what are they you're being pushed in your feed based on what's popular.
Right.
So it's not just what you chose.
Now we'll talk about a little bit about what we do at BPI and I suppose the services that sort of meet that need, respond to those issues. But I want to go back actually, because I suppose to understand where we are today and going forward, I mean, you had this amazing cockpit view of change in 2008, working on the Obama campaign, working on what was considered the first breakthrough digital campaign to persuade people and to bring about change. Tell us about it.
Well, it's funny. On the one hand, it feels like a very long time ago.
Right.
On the other hand, there's so many similarities between that period and today. So I was very fortunate to work on the Obama campaign. I led the digital marketing efforts.
Did you want to go into politics? Was that the plan?
I mean, fortunately, I wouldn't wish running for office on anybody, and I never aspired to do that. But yes, I've always been drawn to politics.
Right.
I live in raised my kids in Washington D.C. Love being around it.
Yeah.
Love the ability, and partially because I always came up with the belief that I was certainly brought up to believe that was the way you could. Through government, through collective action was the best way to help people. Interestingly, as I've grown, I've realized actually there's a limit to what government can do, and we're going to need brands and NGOs, and we're going to need everyone to solve these kinds of problems. But back
then, we're in the world of yes, we can, right?
Yes.
The world where actually optimism's on the rise, positivity's there in terms of what can be done, and you're working for the candidate that embodies hope, right? So what does that feel like?
Well, and he was, one thing to remember about Obama is that if you were to ask him, if you were to ask David Axelrod, the sort of chief strategist, they would tell you that they never set out to run a digital campaign, but they were the underdog.
Yeah.
Like, they were a huge underdog, right? He first-term senator, no money. And so, the only way that they could win is by being willing to take risks.
And disrupt.
And disrupt and find new channels, engage new people. And try things.
Yeah.
And so really our digital marketing efforts and a lot of that campaign came from we had very little to lose, right? So we were willing to try things and innovate actually long before other spaces.
And I suppose that's kind of startup politics, but very quickly, we've talked about this, is that there's a level of sophistication where even like a speech is no longer written as a speech. It's written in terms of actually what are going to be the takeouts, what's going to be the 5-second clip, what's going to be, the level of sophistication that suddenly, sort of seemed to happen at speed, at pace, seemed to be a big part of what that brand was all about being on the money, on the button, on the pulse.
Well, certainly there's so many parallels to what the changes we were just talking about today, right? Because if you think about then, it was the great financial crisis plus the birth of social media for the first time. But it was still basically pre-newsfeed. It was a different era, but it was the first time we could really empower supporters.
Yeah.
Right. It was I think it was the first real modern grassroots digital campaign, and which was a huge change, that we are not going to talk top down to people. We're going to empower them to talk to their own networks.
Do you think you see that in hindsight, or were you feeling it at the time?
I think that was very clear at the time. That was a very explicit strategy. And one of the campaigns and marketing, by the way, has been was very top down, is still largely one to many. And one of the things we've always talked about is sort of networks, not neighbors. That whether you're knocking on someone's door in a political campaign or you're marketing to them or communicating to them, the messenger matters.
Yeah.
Right. And and particularly today, as any kind of trust and authority all around the world, and we see this country by country, right? The value of establishments is dropping very quickly, and so expertise is different. And
right.
So the people that can persuade you the most are the people that are not the experts in the field, the economists or the scientists. It's your friends.
So I suppose this is like a massive lab, right? You're experimenting, and you worked on 2 campaigns, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, and then presumably they evolved and they changed, but at some point, a business was born. An idea was actually, this is what you do in the world of public service. Maybe I can do this in the world of business. Tell us about that in terms of actually when you thought, well, actually, maybe I could create something commercial out of it.
So BPI stands for Bully Pulpit International, and I know every time I'm in London or in Europe,
Don't apologize.
People say,
Andrew.
"What on
Tell
earth?
us what
on
a bully
earth is
pulpit
that?"
is.
But the bully pulpit is a term from President Teddy Roosevelt in the United States, which is about basically around how do you use the power of the presidency to move the public?
Yeah.
How do we move the public conversation and through that change
The bully
policy and
pulpit
change the
moment.
world?
Yeah.
It is
Yeah.
the pulpit being this and. It meant actually good pulpit, not angry preaching. But how do you have this unique ability of the American presidency? But I think your PM and many other CEOs have this too, to really convene the conversation.
Yeah.
And obviously the I, which now stands for international, was interactive. Because
right.
we felt there was exactly this, that it was the Obama campaign, like not that many campaigns. Politics was cool at the time. Obama was cool, is cool. But every brand was coming to us and say, okay, wait, how do we do that? We realized that marketing has changed, communications has changed, and we need a fundamentally different approach.
Right.
And we were very lucky to be starting at a time when, in 2009, when some of the biggest brands in the world didn't feel like they had this capability. And so we were able to be in that room. We were not made necessarily the first chair day one. First chair is sort of an aspirational goal. It's something we're working towards every day. We have to earn every day. We don't just get. And every time we think we found it, we realize there's another table somewhere, right? So it's a a long-term goal to really
a lot of chairs to get to the first. But I think the thing also that you said in some of the answers you sent to us in terms of best tip for life, find your tribe, right? So was that tribe for you business? I mean, are you in the play, or actually was it the political world? Where did you find your tribe?
So I'm a huge believer that a lot of success is about not just picking the right industry that's going to be growing, but finding the people that you want to work with, that you're really loyal to, that you have shared experiences with, that become your tribe, that you can work with over the course of your career.
Right.
I found that in politics. The Obama community is an example. But increasingly the political world in the United States, because actually there's a lot of commonality between, say, the Bush world and the Obama world. Truthfully, they get along pretty well these days, and others, is really a tribe that is sort of growing up together. And so much of the senior team, our original senior team, was being able to draw from other leaders, not from the digital side necessarily of the Obama world, but from other side, from speech writing, from communications, from polling and research, and likewise. As if you think about who is the first chair on the client side within an organization, oftentimes it's the most senior political person in the building.
Yeah.
Right? And they want people that are part of their tribe, that speak their language, can keep up with them, that they know get it, that they trust.
Well, it's interesting because, I mean, special assistants are something that we're seeing over here in the UK. Rishi Sunak's just become sort of chief advisor at Goldman Sachs. I mean, I suppose this point of view that actually, look at Nick Clegg at Meta and other people where actually that, you're right, they bring that kind of background where they bring something new and different. I mean, you've cited another great power broker, James Baker, as an influence. Other side of the aisle, but somebody. I mean, a lot of people won't even know who James Baker was, but actually, you probably know what he did in terms of his influence and his ability to get things done.
So, James Baker, if you ask me, like who is someone that I think is really impressive. James Baker would not be an obvious one, probably from a Democrat out of the United States. But a couple of things that, James Baker became Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury, White House Chief of Staff, three of the most powerful positions in the United States government under Reagan and then George H.W. Bush. What is interesting about one of the things that, as I start to look towards maybe as the second half of my career, one of the things that really inspires me about James Baker was that when James Baker turned 40, he was a lowly lawyer in Texas in sort of a middling firm, and totally, nobody knew who he was, and because of his real ability to manage, he obviously helped when the Soviet Union, he was Secretary of State during the fall of the Soviet Union and was able to negotiate peace, German reunification, the first Iraq War, major foreign policy victories, but this is a guy that no one knew who he was at 40. No. And so he was totally able to reinvent himself and learn new things and keep learning. And that is, to me, really inspirational.
Yeah.
Sort of looking
I think there is a career inspiration there, but I suppose also there was a style inspiration because, I mean, he was much more quietly spoken perhaps than today's politician, much more known for his diplomacy, his pragmatism,
able to
and
bring
actually
people together
on
yes.
mission. Wanting to get the job done, right? But how does that world exist today? I mean, could a James Baker come to the fore in 2025 as opposed to 1985, let's say?
I want to believe the answer to that's yes, and I think we all have to keep working for an environment in politics and in business where capable people can do well.
Right.
And, I think there's an increasing question of, would somebody like that become a principal today, or would they stay a staffer?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think that's an interesting question. But look, I do think we're seeing more intersectionality between business leaders and government leaders, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Because I think we're realizing that, frankly, there was a long period that I've come up in, right, from really the, sort of the end of the Cold War till recently, where in many ways, the government wasn't that necessary for the innovations that were happening in the economy, right? And if anything, a lot of what governments in Europe and the States were doing was try to take government out of certain parts of the economy. The next 10 years are different.
Right.
The
So
next,
government's got to lean in, right? Or
very much so. Like
Right.
we're going to be we're about to go through a fascinating period of economic and technological change, from AI to precision medicine, obviously what's going to happen in defense and global security,
And these are the markets of the future. you're talking
yeah,
about,
exactly.
right?
It's just sustainability, and government's going to the way government supports, inhibits, regulates, protects is going to define the next decade.
And yet, a lot of people watching this will think, yeah, but I've seen, aged senators and people that just, sort of buildings that were built in medieval times, whatever. I mean, how fit for this modern world is modern democracy?
That's the challenge. But I think I think most leaders are realizing this is existential, right? And I think we're seeing that. You're starting to hear that out of Germany. You're starting to hear that out of, there are a lot of frankly interesting democratic models in Europe where they get it. You look at Estonia. You look at the Nordics where they're really there. So I don't think it's about necessarily democracy as an inhibitor. Age is a challenge, but again, you look at Henry Kissinger writing a book about AI at almost 100.
Yeah.
I don't think it's about age. I think it's about, are we leaning in and are we
Yeah.
learning?
Yeah. And actually, but I think an approach to how you see the future, friend or foe. If your view is we've hardly got started, the glass is half full, not half empty, you tend to view the world differently than if you think, well, actually, the robots are coming for all of our jobs. It's end of days stuff. So I think outlook really matters, doesn't it? Character, attitude.
Well, and we spent a lot of time, as you know, researching views on change and how do we help people lead through change? Because if we're not leading through change, change can be very, very scary.
Yeah.
Right. AI is a great example of this. Many pieces are great examples. And what we're seeing is that basically, we have two economies in most of the Western world where we have one relatively urban economy that, at least up to this point in the AI development, has done rather well over the last 20 years and has a fairly positive view of the future.
Yeah.
And of technology and of globalization. And another real part of the economy that feels really left behind. And as a result, we've seen the rise of populism, not just in politics, but in business and in life. And, it is very much not a U.S. only phenomenon.
So tell us how that then comes into the briefs that you're being asked to answer on a practical level, right? in terms of, I suppose, the exam questions that the business has to grapple with to find answers to.
Well, the businesses can't escape this environment. I think that for a long time, business leaders would say, we're not political.
Right.
We don't want anything to
Somebody
do with
else's
this.
problem.
This isn't our issue.
Yeah.
We're just trying to run a business. And I think they're finding that's no longer viable, which doesn't mean they have to be political. But what's interesting is that
They
I
have
think
to be activist,
well,
presumably.
no, I don't even think they have to be activists, but they have to understand the environment that
Right,
they're
aware.
in and how they
Right.
fit. So, for instance, one of the things that probably the most common call we're getting this year is, hey, look, we have a terrific communications team. We have great relationships with reporters. The stories have been good. Why do things feel so bad?
Right.
What's going on? Why do our reputation scores keep going down? Why are there boycotts or or even violence? Like you look at, there was a CEO that's assassinated in the United States on the healthcare side recently. Where is this coming from? And one of the things I think we are helping brands try to understand is that where they're being that the reach of traditional news is just very poor.
Yeah.
And it's not only low in aggregate, but it's particularly limited in the types of people that it reaches.
And is that it? Is it the end of traditional media, do you think? Or actually, where does this go next in terms of, is there a moment where there's a reaction against this ever sort of drift towards more and more fragmentation? Or actually, does technology provide an answer, or do we actually seek answers from other eras in terms of how society convenes and brings itself back together?
Well, so let me answer both that and the corporate question, because I think what we're finding is that what brands are realizing is that oftentimes there's 10 times more content about them on social media, truthfully, and that they don't really have a grasp of the reach, and they certainly don't have a grasp of the impact compared to traditional news. But of course, the traditional news and the reporters are still critical. Mm-hmm. One, that's who brands are eager to engage with, and that's often who breaks stories and starts stories. But the way that people encounter them is through their feeds. Yeah. Right? It's through, and increasingly video first feeds, right? On TikTok and Reels and YouTube. And that's, again, that's everywhere in the world. And if you look at Asia and Latin America, even more so, they're way ahead. Right. Europe and the US are even a little bit behind in some of these things. And so where does this go? I don't think I'm not all doom and gloom about it. I think there are a lot of interesting bright spots. Yeah. There are but the power dynamic in news is shifting, and it's shifting to personalities, not publications. So I'm not sure I would sit here and we support some of these news organizations or different media organizations in different ways. There are a lot of ways, they're doing a lot of interesting things to monetize around sports and entertainment and documentaries and bright spots. And culture, I do think, can be the convener. Right. I think there is still a real convening power of culture. It's we've made our biggest investment this year in a group called Proper Daily as we move out of Los Angeles and Miami, as we move into the culture space and are creating more content and working with creators, right, who are not, because sports is really not, it's still not seen as sort of fragmented and polarized. There's a limited supply. There's only one game. Yeah. There's only one team.
We can see that, and we've got Wimbledon being played here in the tennis this week. I mean, there's a lot of eyes on one court, right?
Well, we have a lot of football in the United States this week, right? With with the Club World Cup, and so we see huge opportunities there. But really, what we're finding is that the journalists themselves are realizing that if they have built brands, they don't need their publications. Right. So every day we're seeing another terrific journalist become an entrepreneur. Yeah. Right, and start a newsletter. Start a TikTok feed,
a podcast.
Yeah, and I don't think that's necessarily bad. No. Some of those are terrific, straight up journalists.
I think it's been, there has been almost this kind of like, sort of Mount Rushmore style of like, this is the way it is, and it's etched into the stone of public life that you will only get your media from certain areas, and then it's all changed. But I suppose a lot of people sit here and go, and look where that's got us, right? Look at a world of where nobody trusts anyone, nobody trusts what they're reading. I suppose you've talked about that idea about leading change or be consumed by it, and published the Resilience Index, which I think gives a really fascinating idea of actually, how do you exist in that environment? I mean, what are the factors that actually help you navigate that world, which can be, I suppose, from a corporate perspective, extremely dangerous on things like reputation and the way people feel about you?
And disconcerting, because I think we've been told for multiple decades that as a CEO or as a chief communications officer, you need to be measuring your favorability and your trust. And it turns out those are very fragile measures because we're living effectively in a post-trust world. And effectively, there's slight differences between, for instance, UK, France, Germany, and the US, but very, very slight.
So break that down for us, post-trust world. So what's the component parts of that?
Fundamentally, people will believe almost anything about a brand. Like there's just no assumption that brands will do good, and there's very little understanding of, because there's been so much turnover, with the exception of maybe Jamie Dimon or a handful of other long-term CEOs.
No smoke with that fire.
Right. There's very little connection to who these business leaders are, and so almost anything will be believed about them, which makes disinformation and misinformation so potent. And so one of the things that we've looked at is, okay, and also what's interesting is that brands are hesitant usually to test attacks on themselves because we couldn't possibly, some lawyer says we couldn't possibly test that. And so when they get attacked, they realize too late how fragile they are. And so what the Resilience Index is basically a look at, okay, if these are the kinds of attacks that are likely to come at brands or NGOs, organizations, leaders, how will they fare? Will they stick or will they not stick? And it turns out there are huge differences. So oftentimes we'll look at two brands that have identical favorability scores, same industry, like two automakers, two airlines, very similar trust scores that perform one can perform twice as well as the other.
And why is that?
So the nice thing is, because we've asked 60 some odd traits that we're looking at across 200 brands and in half a dozen countries. The first round, we're going to add a lot more countries next year, is that we're able to really correlate and look back at what are some of these attributes, right? And there are a few attributes that really matter. But the biggest question is sort of twofold. One is, is this a faceless institution, or is there a person or a set of leaders that they can actually identify with, and what is the real motivation behind those people? Are they out for something bigger, right? Do we know what these people are about? And yes, they might not be perfect. The organization might not be perfect. We understand that they're a business. That's okay. But do we believe there's something that they're interested in beyond just purely profit?
Right. And I think it's worth saying that a big part of the BPI model is data, right? And I mean, in terms of what clients can understand about the world, I mean, is the resilience index the kind of like, is that the world you're advising them on, or is there a lot more to it in terms of the day job?
Well, I think it's the first step, right? The resilience index also helps you understand how you swing at fewer pitches, right? So every organization is being asked to consider 50 things on any given day, right? Employee investments, community investments. Are you responding to ESG or diversity and inclusion, or many other things, and it helps. I think one of the things that resilience does, and resilience is different for every industry and every brand. So a lot of times we're doing sort of deep custom research around what makes every individual brand resilient, and if they lean into just a couple things to get one narrative out there,
right,
which is the one that's really going to help them. And then what that allows us to do is, when you combine that with the conversation we were just having around reach, is to then look at your content, all the things happening about you and your competitors in pretty real time, and being able to sort of map it on, if you can imagine a sort of a 2x2 matrix, right? You can map impact, right? So what's persuasive and what's not. And often that'll surprise you, because some of the things that are really popular, people just don't believe. And some of the things that you don't think are a big deal are really persuasive and damaging. And you can map it also on reach. And that's when you start to look at, wow, some of these things on social are getting a ton of reach, but actually I might have great press that is terrific that I should be promoting because no one's seen it.
So alongside the first chair, you're going to look at very, very different sort of capabilities that are going to go with that in the future, I guess, in terms of actually where you spend, how you organize, the skills you're going to look for.
Well, and it looks a lot more like a campaign.
Right.
And so it's almost like a campaign
so
manager.
we're back to
exactly
the campaigning style, the big idea, the idealism. Interesting, because when you visit BPI in DC, is that outside every room is a fictitious sort of president, right? From
we've
West
named all our
Wing,
conference rooms, yes.
Battlestar Galactica. They're all kind of, I suppose, campaigning presidents that stand for the hope of a better tomorrow. Is that the sort of the style, do you think?
And I think that's what every brand needs to have the capability to do, which is to respond and measure in real time and deploy messages. And the reality is, it's just going to be a lot more work than it used to be. It's not that you can't reach people, but it is harder. You have to do 5 times more interviews than you used to have to do. You have to be on more channels than you used to have to be on, right? And we need things that are in new arrows in the quiver. That might be in culture, that might be in content you're creating yourself, that might be in working with influencers, because there's still trust.
Yeah.
But the trust is with a different set of institutions. There's a parasocial relationship. People trust influencers. They're in your ear. It's one of the reasons podcasts are so powerful. You spend a lot of time with these people.
How do you? I can't have this interview without talking about Trump, because the effect. He's a truly disruptive force in no longer just in US politics, the world, right? In terms of how he will be remembered, in terms of his effect on this environment, I think, I suppose, I actually challenge you to both positively and negatively. What would you take in terms of the highs and lows, in terms of actually what that hugely disruptive style of communicator, but obviously a hugely talented communicator as well?
Well, look, politics aside, right? I think, on the geopolitical world, I think he's accelerated a multipolar world 10 years, probably, and has broken, obviously, a lot of alliances that I think we're going to suffer for a long time. But from a communications perspective, in many ways, Trump is from the New York TV world.
Yeah.
Trump is a game show host. He understands ratings. He understands psychology. Is really a master of coming up with the soundbite. No tax on tips.
Yeah.
And being able to flood the zone and frankly just keep everyone off balance.
Yeah.
And what's interesting now is we see a lot of people trying to emulate the president, we've had a lot of success, right?
In what, in business or in public life?
Both.
Right.
Both.
Right.
You know, I think because people look for the easy version of it. So they say, oh, it must be podcasts.
Yeah.
And of course, there's some truth to that. Of course, you need to understand podcasts. But, you know, like most CEOs could not go on Joe Rogan. These podcast interviews are actually extremely bright. Lex Friedman, you know.
Is there that? Because I mean, I think it's interesting about the, you know, the keep it simple, stupid, that kind of the KISS thing. I think Clinton came up with is that, I mean, he is a master of the soundbite, no doubt about it. But if you were to try and draw a lesson for a CEO that's looking at like the president of the United States at the moment in terms of actually what's the standout style of leadership in terms of something to take out of that style of presidency, which is obviously hugely different to his predecessors.
Well, I think, you know, the channels are different than the predecessors, but I think ultimately we're in a change moment. Last year, 2024, we had elections in over half the world, right? And other than maybe India, right, we had a change moment pretty much everywhere, right? Incumbents lost. And so I think, you know, what is Trump particularly good at is that he's leading a change message, and it's a pretty simple change message, right? Of whether you want to call it "Make America Great Again" or "Trump can fix it," right? Like he is a change force, and in a time when people are scared, rightly, that's very appealing. And this is not a time, and we see this for almost every brand too. If you are in this moment, if you were trying to defend the status quo, if you were trying to explain, if only people understood our business, if you're explaining, you're losing, right? And facts alone are not sufficient. Facts
facts alone can be complex and difficult, and
then people don't care.
And grey, right?
Facts are a part of an emotional story. They need to give the scale and the credibility to an emotional story. But there's got to be a narrative of what are you for,
right?
And how are you part of the solution?
Last question. Quote for life. I actually, you might have got knowledge is power in there because you're a voracious reader. 3 books a week?
I try.
I mean, that's a serious. That's a serious amount of knowledge to get through. But also, not much time watching TV anymore. More listening, reading.
I have not had. I have 2 young kids, so I've not had a lot of time for TV. But I do. I am a pretty addicted audiobook and podcast person, so I almost always have something in my ear. And there's the access to content right now is incredible.
Right.
You can hear from, take a podcast like In Good Company, right, with the head of the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund. I mean, like all these people that you just had no access to as a mere mortal, even 5-10 years ago. You can learn a tremendous amount from them.
I agree. I mean, it's there, right? But let's look. So you gave us 2 quotes, right? Do you want me to just read them out? I don't think because they're reasonably long ones, or have you got them?
Sure. I mean, I could give a lot of favorite quotes. It's hard to pick one. But to going back to Teddy Roosevelt, who we've obviously an homage we've recognized in the firm. He has a line that keep your eyes on the stars and your feet on the ground. And I've always believed that, which is, look, we can be optimistic, we can care about making change, but we have to live in reality. We have to be practical. And we can't help people make change if we can't meet them where they are.
And I suppose you can trip up if you're only looking up, right?
You could, exactly. We have to live in the real world and be realistic and data driven and flexible.
And then you have a second quote here: mediocrity knows nothing. Mediocrity knows nothing higher than itself, but talent instantly recognizes genius. Tell us about that.
I'm a big Sherlock Holmes fan.
Right.
My dog is actually named Sherlock. My last dog was named Watson.
Mycroft.
Yeah, it could be. No, picking a single Arthur Conan Doyle quote is hard, but I do think the more that I learn, I think the more I realize how little I know. But the ability to find talent and how also I think the tragedy of how much talent and expertise is sort of demonized in this society, I think is really stuck with me.
I think wonderment about the future, right? I mean, it's there to be found, right?
But I'm an optimistic person. I'm excited by the technologies that are happening right now, and as we're very fortunate that we're able to work with many of the most impactful, largest business NGOs, political leaders in the world, and I have yet to meet one that I don't think means well.
Yeah.
Right. These most powerful business leaders, or major global philanthropists or billionaires. Everybody wants to help. They want to do the right thing. They want to be impactful, and it's harder than ever for them to do that. And I think we're in a really fortunate position to be able to work with them on some of the most important issues every day.
Andrew, alas, we must leave it there. Thank you for sharing the story of the first chair advisor. It's been a pleasure to tell it with you.
Thanks for having me.